Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to the channel. I'm here with another discussion video. Today's topic is pretty interesting. Over the channel recently, we've been going over the character of Starkiller Galen Marek. He's a really tanky character in the lore. He's a character that is faced with conflicts with characters that on paper should be far more powerful than he is, such as his own master and Vader, and of course Palpatine. These are the characters that he's built up to eventually face. And in the game, he actually beats Vader in the first Force Unleashed game, and then he beats him again, or the clone of Starkiller, Subject 1138, beats Vader again in the Force Unleashed 2. Starkiller is one of those characters that many fans consider to be the upper echelon of Star Wars characters' power. He is essentially what would happen if Luke Skywalker was trained by Vader at a very young age. That's famously what the developers wanted to do when they were making the first Force Unleashed game. So when we have a character that's so massively powerful like Starkiller, a character who defeats council members such as Shaak Ti, a character who beats Lord Vader, and who Palpatine even says at the end of the first game had the potential to surpass him and be his equal maybe, that brings up a question. What characters in the Star Wars lore can take down Starkiller, who is a character that appears to be on this Mount Rushmore in terms of power? I'm again joined with the Archivist, and today we are lucky to be breaking down 3 characters which we full-heartedly believe would absolutely beat Starkiller. Now, the way that we've done this is with these 3 characters, they will all have varying levels of difficulty taking down the Starkiller character in our heads, because Starkiller is extremely powerful. The whole foundation of the character is built on the power fantasy of unleashing the Force, of what the Force is capable of. Now, a lot of times with Force wielders, Jedi and Sith characters, their power is beneath the surface. It's not something that is unleashed very often. And this is sometimes in the lore people get a little bit confused. We have these characters whose upper limits are the capability to rip apart buildings and to rip apart ships, but because they're so powerful, as a Jedi, they're taught to restrain that. Now, the Force Unleashed rips apart all those barriers, be it mental, physical, or even sometimes the barriers of storytelling, because again, it is a game. And it breaks down the idea of what would happen if a Force wielder fought with 100% potency all of the time. And that's where Starkiller originates. So obviously he's going to be this massively powerful character. In terms of in-lore stuff, I'll go back and forth with the Archivist, but some of the most important things that he's done is, again, defeated Jedi Council member Shaak Ti, who was considered one of the premier Jedi during the time of the Clone Wars. Now, while it could be said that Shaak Ti is very much past her prime during the events of the first Force Unleashed game when she meets up and duels Galen Marek, she's still one of the top Jedi. In fact, she was pretty much the only Jedi besides Sindralig that Anakin deemed as a real, true, legitimate threat during Operation Nightfall. So I'll go ahead and let the Archivist talk now for a second. So what do you think of Starkiller, man? What are your thoughts on his power and where he is in terms of the landscape of power scaling in Star Wars?
I think anyone who knows me any time before now would know that I have actually had a contrary opinion to most when it comes to Starkiller. I have not liked him for the longest time simply because his sheer power for me didn't make a whole lot of sense in the context of Star Wars, and it kind of felt like it cheapened the overall potential of the Chosen One and kind of made someone like Vader a little bit obsolete, and that always rubbed me the wrong way. But as I've been digging more into his lore and getting used to him as a character, and I've even revisited the games, I'm currently going through my first real playthrough of the console version of The Force Unleashed, I'm more and more finding myself warming up to him as a character and getting used to the overwhelming power fantasy that is the Force Unleashed universe. And I mean, it is pretty fun. It is pretty fun to really test the limits of what the Force is able to do in a character that just seems to have no limits of his own. And, because we hear a lot about how powerful the Sith Lords of old are, how much they were basically one-man armies, men like Tulak Hord, Darth Nihilus, and things like that. But the last time we were able to feel that kind of power was maybe in KOTOR when we played as Revan, but even then it wasn't like we were lore accurate Revan. But the Force Unleashed universe just makes everything feel lore accurate to what we read in the books and in the histories. And I don't know, having that characterized through Starkiller, I'm coming around to it.
Yeah, absolutely. So to you, what are some of Starkiller Galen Marek's most impressive feats in the lore?
I mean, I'm going to probably be pulling up the things that most people pull up. I mean, the guy not only grounded an entire Star Destroyer, but his clone punched a Star Destroyer-sized hole into the city on Cato Nemoidia. I mean, he defeated Darth Vader twice and resisted and defeated Darth Sidious in a duel. I mean, I think that's one thing that people brush over, that before he died, he did technically defeat Darth Sidious. In order for Palpatine to actually put him down, he finally recognized Galen Marek as a real threat, something only Yoda really managed to do. And of course, debatably Mace Windu as well. And so he had to put in his full power. And this is, of course, Palpatine at his most powerful around the time of the original trilogy, where he learned a lot more about the dark side and has perfected his own control of the dark side to its absolute peak. And he had to put the full power of his Force lightning to actually defeat Galen. And for a little bit of time, Galen was able to hold back that Force lightning until he died. So I think
so. There's
just
even an
alone,
argument to be made that this version of Palpatine is stronger than the other version that Yoda faced.
Yes, yeah, in my opinion, there's not really an argument about that. I can find, if you give me some time, I could find several lore pieces to prove that Palpatine 20 years later, in the Force at least, is even more powerful. Body-wise, I mean, he's a lot older, so maybe not, but in the Force, 100% he's much stronger.
So it goes without being said that Starkiller is one of the most powerful characters in all of Star Wars lore. You would agree?
Yeah, I can see that, man.
So, with that said, 3 characters that we think Galen Marek would beat. So
you say beats
Galen? Not beat. Sorry, 3 characters who would absolutely beat Galen Marek Starkiller, and by absolutely, we don't mean that they would necessarily curb stomp them right away. But what we mean is that 3 characters who, at the end of the day, who is standing. We think that these 3 characters would defeat Starkiller. Again, we think that they would defeat him with varying degrees of success, and, we'll address that. But let's go ahead and jump into our first character, the closest of the 3 matchups, but at the end of it, a character that we do think would be able to take out Starkiller, and that's Darth Malgus. This was not a very easy process, frankly, sifting through the lore, trying to find characters who can beat Starkiller. So what we have settled on is 3 master combatants, all things said. 3 extremely experienced fighters, because that is the area where we think that we could target Galen Marek Starkiller, is with overwhelming experience. Because all things considered, he's massively powerful, but there are far more seasoned warriors in the lore that we can pull from. And that's why we thought Malgus was an appropriate first pick. Now, this, again, is going to be the closest of the 3 duels, but for many reasons, we think that Malgus would beat Starkiller at the end, even if Malgus somehow dies of his injuries afterwards, which I think is possible. Malgus, of course, has an advantage in battle IQ and experience. The quality of Jedi that Darth Malgus fought during his time were far more dangerous and far more brutal Jedi than we see in the Clone Wars, and far more brutal than any Jedi that Galen Marek fought against. Malgus fought Jedi such as Kowsan Derek, who was a Jedi battle master, who was a controversial figure among the Jedi because of his practices of the Sith lightsaber forms and Sith lightsabers. In fact, he inspired his apprentice, Satele Shan, a future Grand Master, to use a double-bladed lightsaber, taking after and hearkening after the practice of the Sith.
Real
Which
quick about Calcin Derek, I think it's interesting about him. You mentioned he was controversial. If you watch his opening cinematic, he was one of the only Jedi who wore battle armor before the Sith Empire actually returned.
Yeah, and this is a Jedi, again, the Battle Master, one of the best duelists of the era, and an apprentice Malgus beats Calcin Derek. He later defeats Ven Zalo at the Jedi Temple, and again, his feats there are phenomenal because he's just cleaving through normal Jedi before he eventually finds Ven Zalo. And as he's fighting Ven Zalo, he realizes that his lightsaber form is very, very meticulous and near perfect. And essentially, he's going to have to tank a hit if he's going to open up Ven Zalo's guard whatsoever. So that's just an in-lore example of the analytical mind of Malgus. He also killed his lover because he believed that she was an emotional weakness for him. Again, this is something that Starkiller would never do. Malgus is going to these levels to make himself the perfect warrior and the perfect fighter, to where even if his potential isn't quite Starkiller's, Malgus is willing to do anything to win at the end of the day, and I don't think Starkiller is.
You know, I would agree. I think what's interesting about Malgus is that he's not just willing to do anything it takes to win. He's a type of Sith Lord who actively pursues opportunities to challenge himself for the win. He was very excited to fight Ven Zalo, and he was looking forward to it. And, you know, it's like when he found an opponent that was worthy of him, Zalo being one of them, he actually gave him respect before engaging in battle. And like you pointed out, Starkiller, he will do the mission, but the mission isn't always his goal. Usually his goal is either, you know, in the beginning it was to please Vader and serve the Empire, then towards the end it was to protect his friends, and then his clone was just trying to find the secrets. And a lot of the challenges he faces are simply obstacles to his goal. If the fight itself is the goal, I just don't know if he has the kind of determination that Malgus does to win.
I don't think so. Another thing about Malgus is he's durable. I fully expect Starkiller Galen to catch Malgus several times during their fight. But one of the big things that allowed Vader to keep coming back against Starkiller was his durability. And I think that Malgus's durability is comparable to that of Vader. So
exceeds it.
It maybe exceeds it. Vader's got some crazy stuff in canon, like walking through the lava of Mustafar. Like, I think that they're comparable. I wouldn't say exceed. I'd say comparable. But
I don't know, man. I just think, you know, because Vader, he's so hindered by his suit. If you strike the right point on his suit, he's got weak spots. I think Malgus himself, besides maybe his rebreather, doesn't really have weaknesses like that.
I guess so. I don't know. I would call them comparable. But again, that was one of the things that gave Vader I'm not going to say an advantage, but it kept him in the fight with Starkiller. Now, I want to address this real quickly before we get deeper. Star Wars does not operate under ABC logic in terms of duels and fights. So what I mean by that is just because one character beats another doesn't mean that because that character was able to somehow defeat someone prior that that automatically puts the first character as like the best in tier 1. It doesn't operate like that. So what I mean is I don't necessarily think that I believe Malgus beats Starkiller, that necessarily Malgus would beat Vader. Again, that's not something that is thoroughly researched yet, and maybe one day we will do a Malgus versus Vader, but that's not the topic of this video. Yeah, no, that'd be tough. So with all of that said, that was our first pick, Malgus. We think Malgus would probably beat Starkiller 6 out of 10 times is what I would give Malgus.
Yeah, I think it, and to kind of explain a little bit further on what you mentioned a second ago, Malgus has been able to, like you say, his defense kind of keeps him in the fight, as he had taken once a force blast from Satil Shan that put him into the side of a small mountain, large cliff, depending on how you want to view that. And, we know that Starkiller dishes out force blasts like that on the regular. And
he does.
So, yeah, and since Malgus was able to come back from that, or at least resist it for a time when he was fighting Satele, I think he would be able to stand his own in a fight, especially, and we mentioned earlier that he had fought Venzalo and some of these more prime Jedi. The reason we bring that up is because Starkiller, in comparison, a lot of his victories when it came down to just saber-to-saber combat were against grizzled Jedi left over from the Clone Wars. I mean, none of them were slouched. Yeah, no, none of the people that Starkiller fought were slouches by any means, but Rom Koda was an old man. Kazdan Paratus was out of his mind. And I mean, Shaak Ti, who wasn't exactly the best duelist in the Clone Wars, but was still a Jedi Council member to be sure, was the strongest of them. And I just think that Malgus's experience with the Old Republic Jedi, kind of puts him on an entire league above.
Absolutely. Just think of what a duel between somebody like Shaak Ti versus Cal Derek would look like. Like, I'd give that to Cal Derek any day of the week.
Easily.
So, yeah, there's really no comparison. Those Old Republic Jedi were tanks, and they were not to be trifled with. Same with the Sith. Mm-hmm. These are wartime Jedi, and the Clone Wars are wartime Jedi too. But in a lot of ways, these Old Republic Jedi, more grizzled, they've seen worse. They've seen so much worse. The threat of the Sith is a far more recent threat in their minds than the Clone Wars era. So they're a little bit more prepared.
Exactly. And yeah, I mean, that's just kind of what it comes down to. We did a video some time ago comparing the Clone Wars Jedi to the Old Republic Jedi. And even in their prime, in the very peak of the Clone Wars, Anakin's Jedi Order was just so much weaker than the Jedi fighting in the Great Galactic War. And of course, Starkiller fought Jedi who were out of practice from the Clone Wars era.
Remnants.
If you get what I'm hinting at here.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's move on. So the next character that we think would beat Starkiller is Grandmaster Yoda. This is a character who we think beats Starkiller a little bit more efficiently than Malgus does. And when we're talking about Yoda, we're going to take Prime Yoda for this example. So we'll take Revenge of the Sith era Yoda. A crazy thing about the character of Yoda in general, though, is we don't actually know when his prime was in reality. We can only take where we believe him to be the most powerful from what we've seen. So keep that in mind as well, where we've experienced a lot of these characters' primes. We haven't necessarily experienced Yoda's. With all of that said, in The Force Unleashed 2, the clone of Starkiller was absolutely horrified by Yoda. When he went on into the dark side cave of Dagobah to discover if he was actually a clone or the original Starkiller, he saw Yoda sitting next to the cave with no reaction. And what Starkiller determined was either the creature was a being of pure darkness and an extension of the embodiment of the dark side that was heavy on Dagobah and heavy in the cave, or Yoda was so powerful in the light side of the Force that the cave was simply of no concern to him whatsoever. And the latter of which is the correct answer. So this is a man who was trained by Vader, and the mere presence of Yoda scared him to his very core. So you already have that.
I love that so much.
We talked about experience. Who has more experience than a Jedi Master of 800 years? Lightsaber skill. Yoda is considered in the era of the Clone Wars to be the best lightsaber duelist by far. He's considered in the era by Palpatine to be the best lightsaber duelist. He's considered by Mace Windu, Obi-Wan. Yoda is premier. He's so good that in the Revenge of the Sith novel, Palpatine had to put his lightsaber away when he fought Yoda because Yoda was just better. Another thing that a lot of people don't keep in mind about Yoda, though, is ruthless intent. He is extremely quick to execute justice when he thinks that needs to happen. When he has the will to act, he's not one of these massively powerful characters that holds back. when they're enacting justice or when they're protecting the Republic or those that, he cares for. He will attack his enemies with the full might of the light side of the Force and with the full might of a Jedi of 900. And when Yoda's not holding back, it's different. He just moves different. And when we were talking about this last night, you brought up that he is very similar to another character that you really like, if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, man. I think it's really interesting when we think about the wizened old master type character that Yoda is traditionally seen as, and he is in that role in most cases. But when he's the one actually doing the fighting and there's no protege around that he has to encourage, a lot of people think he's more like how Gandalf might approach villainy. Like you say, trying to beat it with knowledge and wisdom and only really showing your true power when it's absolutely necessary. But he's just not like that, man. When his back is against the wall and the chips are down, Yoda is a lot more like Optimus Prime. And I know that sounds weird at first, but for those of you who are familiar with the way Optimus Prime actually is in like the real Transformers lore and like in the cartoons and like the comic books, he does what has to be done. He's soft-spoken but carries a big gun and is not afraid to use it.
That's Yoda. I think that Yoda would just beat Starkiller because he's smarter. He's more experienced. He's been in more fights. He's a better duelist. There's no real debate that Yoda isn't the superior duelist to Starkiller. He just clearly is. And Starkiller's sort of, especially the clone, he's a little bit mentally weaker, more mentally susceptible. And I think that if Yoda really wanted to prey on that, say, for example, Starkiller had to lean into the dark side to draw more potent energy to try to stop the Grand Master, I think Yoda could disrupt that. I think he's just fought in too many wars. He's fought too many battles. He's seen too many, powerful students fall to the dark side. I think Yoda just has it in the bag. In a lot of ways, Yoda is tailored to beat Starkiller.
Yeah, I think he is. I really do. I think, like you said earlier, Yoda made Palpatine put his lightsaber away, and Starkiller only just barely managed to do that. And so it's just on a level of, I mean, I don't really have much else to say except for what you just said.
Yoda wins.
Yoda wins, man.
All right, dude. You want to take the last one?
Absolutely. So the last one we chose was pre-suit Darth Vader, specifically Anakin on Mustafar. And I know that can sound a little strange because we don't see Anakin exhibit the same kind of force potency that Starkiller does. But if we really look at the lore and the way that Anakin was digging into the dark side around this time, he had fully given into it. Although he didn't show it in the way that Starkiller might with massive attacks in the Force, he was experiencing those levels of power. He was reaching the upper echelons of his ability as a Jedi and about to cross into a new threshold as the Chosen One, of course, before it was snatched away by Obi-Wan. And I know that a lot of people would be like, okay, well, he lost to Obi-Wan, so how is he winning against Starkiller? We have to think about the mindset that Mustafar Vader is in right now. Anakin loses to Obi-Wan there mostly because Obi-Wan is the one he's fighting. He's more emotionally charged in that fight. He's making mistakes. He's kind of whacking at Obi-Wan with his lightsaber. It's a very personal fight for Anakin fighting Obi-Wan. Like, this is the guy that Anakin believes took his wife from him and turned her against him. And so it's one of those things where if he were in a fight with Starkiller and he's in his Mustafar Vader version, he's not going to be emotionally charged because he's going to have his mind, and all that tactical power that Anakin usually has on the battlefield is going to be given over to his Vader self. So he's going to be a lot more like how he was in his raid on the Jedi Temple, which is cold, calculated, and efficient. And I think he would absolutely cut Galen Marek up.
I think so too. I agree completely with everything you said about Obi-Wan. Starkiller's not that much of a disciplined character, where Obi-Wan is extremely disciplined, at least in his approach to combat. Obi-Wan's much more disciplined. And it's it's the reserve, it's the backpedal that keeps Anakin frustrated and that allows Obi-Wan to strike at really the only moment where Anakin was ever truly exposed and weak in the whole duel. But one of Anakin and Vader's most valuable weapons is his mind. And we spoke about this yesterday, but when Vader and Anakin are fighting with their mind and the strategic genius, he's nearly unstoppable. And that is what Obi-Wan forces Anakin to relinquish in Revenge of the Sith. He forces him to relinquish his mind and his strategic battlefield IQ because he is blind. He's literally blinded by rage. That's what that means. When they say that you're blinded by your rage, Obi-Wan is insulting people that, their victory has already defeated you. That's the thing that Bane said to Batman in The Dark Knight Rises. And that's completely true. It was Anakin's lust for victory that defeated him because it exposed him. It showed that he had the soft underbelly that was exposed only in a moment due to his ego and his arrogance, that he thought he could pull over a maneuver that Obi-Wan knew would leave him vulnerable momentarily. With all of that said, Starkiller's not going to do any of that. Starkiller is a blunt instrument, and he's going to attack like a blunt instrument. And I think that he's going to be cut down with a level of intensity and a meticulous, well-striked blow reminiscent of the raw fury of the Vader in his suit, but with the precision of like a Dooku. And I think that we were really, really, really robbed of what a non-hindered Vader would look like. And we have to constantly be reminded that a non-hindered Vader is, the most powerful character potential-wise in the lore. And even on Mustafar, I think that if he's not conflicted and if he is focused on taking out Starkiller, I think that Vader does it.
Starkiller has a lot of ferocity, but he has very little grace. And that's something that Anakin has him up on, is Anakin is just as ferocious, but has an amazing amount of technique with him as well.
Yeah. All right, guys. Those are 3 characters that we think would beat Starkiller. We'd obviously love to hear your thoughts down below. Not all of you guys are going to agree, and we would love to hear why. But also, I want to hear 3 more characters that you think would absolutely just mop the floor with Starkiller. And guys, you can't pick Vitiate or Luke because that's cheating. So I challenge you to find 3 characters that would beat Starkiller that we didn't mention in this video that's not Vitiate or Luke or Palpatine. But thank you again to the Archivist for joining us today in the discussion. Always a pleasure.
Hey, man, it's always a pleasure to be here.
So may the Force be with all of you. Thank you so much for listening and have a great day.